It was on my 49th birthday that everything started to fall apart inside. There was no tragedy, no screaming. There was just the uncomfortable silence of a routine that no longer made sense. I sat at the table with my co-workers, listened to the same automatic birthday wishes I heard every year, and smiled that smile you learn to use when you're tired of living in survival mode. But inside, I knew something had died there. I had been working in IT for 25 years. I had stability, experience, a name for myself, but I had no peace, no home, no children, no spouse could fill the void of feeling like a stranger in my own life. I slept in rented apartments, ate in silence, and when I closed my eyes, it wasn't the future that scared me. It was the wasted past. No one prepares us for the moment when success ceases to make sense, when we realize that we followed all the rules but forgot to ask ourselves if we really wanted to play this game. The stress, the anxiety, the invisible pressure to always be efficient, it all crushed me in a subtle, almost polite way. It wasn't a screaming pain, it was a dull exhaustion, a mismatch between what I did and who I was. That's where it started. The end of the part of my life I lived out of inertia, and the beginning of a new start that didn't come with fanfare, but with a silent decision. I was leaving. I didn't know where. I had no plan. But I knew I had to get out of where I was, because staying was like dying slowly. Today, at 51, I look back and understand. I had to reach the end to discover what a beginning really was. It was on a hot morning in Bangkok that I finally understood. I was sitting on a stone staircase with a cheap beer in my hand and my backpack leaning against the wall beside me. There was no rush, no destination. The streets were still alive with the sounds of voices and engines, but inside me there was a rare silence, the silence of peace. 12 months earlier, I was a 50-year-old man, drowning in IT reports, feigning enthusiasm in meetings and collecting pains that no one could see. I woke up every day with a pressure in my chest, as if life had shrunk. I worked for 25 years in air-conditioned offices, selling hours of my life in exchange for an invisible promise of a future. Until one day, in the middle of traffic, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a tired, almost unrecognizable face. It was me, and I decided to leave. I packed my bags with more doubts than certainties, and I left. First Peru, then Vietnam. Then there was no more order, no more plan. I started living in rooms rented for $15 a night, with fewer clothes and more stories. I began to understand how society packages unhappiness in installments. House, car, career. A track where everyone runs, but few know why. With each new city, I shed an old layer. I saw the sun rise in abandoned temples, ate with my hands alongside strangers who smiled with their eyes. In places where my language was foreign, I learned the language of observation. Small acts of kindness, silent respect, shared amazement. And amid the dusty streets and hidden alleys, I rediscovered something that had disappeared from me: curiosity. I know that this kind of life seems unattainable to many, and it's true, it's not simple. But I also know that most of the limits we see are internal constructs. We convince ourselves that it's too late, that we need guarantees, that freedom is a privilege. But the truth is that the biggest risk is to go on without ever trying. If I could tell you one thing right now, it would be, move. Even if it's just to the next neighborhood, into a book, or into yourself. Life is too short to wait for the right moment, because the right moment is when you decide to truly live. And that's what I did. There on the hot staircase in Bangkok, I realized I felt alive again. I woke up before sunrise. It was still early morning when I went out for a walk along the deserted shore of the small town where I was staying. The sea was calm, with hardly a breeze, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the sand. It was my birthday, 51 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. There were no gifts, no cake, no table full of friends, but there was something that had eluded me for years: presence. Being there, feeling the breeze, listening to the sound of the waves, and not wanting to be anywhere else. That, for me, was happiness. A quiet, almost invisible happiness, but incredibly real. I started repeating to myself a phrase that had taken on special meaning in the last year: life is short. I always say this at the end of my videos, but today, more than ever, it struck me as an undeniable truth. It's not just a catchphrase, it's a reminder, a whisper, a muffled cry. Society teaches us to fear failure, to label any change as instability. But what is more unstable than living? Trying to please expectations that are not our own. I discovered over time that it's okay to say, I don't want this for myself anymore. It's okay to want something new, a new routine, a new silence, a new purpose. I remember the decision that brought me here. It wasn't easy. It was scary, but it was also liberating. I didn't wait until I was completely ready, because if I had, I might never have left. And today, looking back, I realize that my only regret is not having done it sooner. If you feel that silent discomfort growing inside you, if your days taste like repetition and emptiness, maybe it's time for a change. It could be a small change, a new hobby, a different route home, or maybe it's something bigger. But don't wait. Don't put it off. Because there comes a time when you don't want more things. You want to feel. You want to breathe without rushing. You want to recognize yourself again. And when that happens, everything changes, even if the world remains the same. 20 years ago, I traveled with a backpack, a torn paper map, and dreams too big for my youth. Then came work, obligations, bills, and when I realized it, I was almost 50, sitting in front of a spreadsheet, wishing I had been braver. Time is cruelly silent. It doesn't warn you when it starts taking parts of you away. Before you know it, decades have passed, and one day I'll do that has turned into dust accumulated in the corners of your memory. That was my biggest regret, not coming back sooner. But it's never too late to rescue parts of yourself. I started over at 50. I relearned how to look at the horizon with desire, to set out on the road with lightness. I didn't need an expensive ticket or an elaborate plan. I started close by, neighboring cities, forgotten trails, conversations with strangers in small cafes. I learned that traveling isn't about distance but about availability, and that the world is huge, but the willingness to move is what really opens borders. Whether crossing oceans or just your own fear, movement is always an act of rebirth. I saw landscapes that no photo can capture. I've been to places that aren't in guidebooks, but now live inside me. The world is confusing, scary, funny, immense, and it's also incredibly beautiful. Just walk with your eyes open and your heart willing to let go of what is familiar. What I hear most are excuses disguised as plans. People who say, one day I'll go, but never choose the day. They wait for the right money, the right partner, the right age. But the truth is, it will never seem like the perfect moment, and that's okay, because it's not about perfection. It's about being in motion. Today I know, time passes even when we stand still, so let it pass while you move. Because every step out of your routine is a step toward yourself, and that in itself is a form of freedom. At first it was strange, eating alone, walking alone, crossing entire cities in silence without a familiar voice by my side. At first I tried to hide it. I fiddled with my phone to look busy, pretended to be confident so I wouldn't seem out of place. But over time I stopped fighting it, and the transformation began. I learned that loneliness has layers. The first is discomfort. The second is strangeness. The third is revealing. In it, you find what the routine had stifled. You start to hear your own breathing. You realize what you really feel. You understand where you still bleed. There is a profound power in being alone without being lonely. And that's what many people confuse. Loneliness is not abandonment. It is presence. A rare presence of yourself to yourself. Amid long bus rides and quiet lunches in forgotten restaurants, I found myself. And the most curious thing is that the more I felt good about myself, the more open I became to others. The conversation with the man at the antique bookstand, the coffee shared with a lonely traveler in Argentina, the smile shared with a child in Thailand. I didn't need strong bonds to feel connected. Authentic moments were enough. Being alone taught me not to beg for company, not to accept crumbs of affection for fear of emptiness. I discovered that emptiness only frightens those who have not yet learned to inhabit it, and that once embraced, it ceases to be threatening and becomes a sacred space for healing and creation. Loneliness made me whole. It made me attentive. It gave me calmer eyes, more generous ears, and a more present silence. And it's not that I started to reject the company of others. On the contrary, I started to value it in a different way, no longer as a dependency, but as sharing. If you have never been truly alone, perhaps you have not yet known yourself. And if you do not yet know yourself, how can you give yourself to another? It was in my own company that I found the rarest freedom, that of not having to run away from myself. I met extraordinary people on this journey, some through YouTube, others on the sidewalks of life. They became more than contacts. They became reflections. Matt, Wally, Erica. Names that may mean nothing to the world, but mean a lot to me. Through them, I relearned to look at the world with fresh eyes, to allow myself to be touched again by the beauty of the simple. Erica was one of those surprises. We traveled together for a while, shared landscapes and silences, and in every moment I felt that life was giving me a second chance, a chance to open my heart, to walk with lightness, to see the world not as a battlefield, but as a garden that blooms in its own time. Today, I turn 51, and it's not just a birthday, it's a rite of passage, a milestone, a symbol that it is possible to be reborn after 50, that it is possible to reinvent yourself when the world seems to have already classified you, that there is still time to feel, to live, to be. That's why I want to invite you. If this story touched something inside you, if at any point you saw yourself on this path, I ask you, enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Not out of vanity, but because every gesture you make helps this message bypass algorithms and reach hearts that are now searching for a sign. And if you want to take it a step further, consider making a donation, any amount. This support is not just financial. It is a vote of confidence, a I'm with you, a keep going. Every contribution sustains this work and allows more people, perhaps like you and me, to find the courage to start over. Life is short, so please, go for a walk, and if you can, leave a hello in the comments. Because sometimes, all we need is to know that we are not alone on this journey.